Welcome to Study Loop.
Going over some concepts of trade and trade gains, we're going to answer these questions A through D. They're just simple yes or no's with brief explanations. So question A says, can trade gains between two countries be achieved if one country has an absolute advantage in the production of all goods? The answer to this one is yes, and this is because even if one country has an absolute advantage in the production of all goods, the two countries are still able to benefit from some trade agreement so long as one country has a comparative advantage in the production of one of the goods. Question B, is it possible for talented people to have a comparative advantage in everything they do? The answer to this one is no, and that's because comparative advantage has to do with opportunity costs. And even though somebody could have an absolute advantage in everything that they do, as we become better at doing things, our opportunity cost for doing other activities becomes high as well. So we may have this absolute advantage in all these things that we do, but we're bound not to have a comparative advantage in everything, considering that comparative advantages comes from having lower opportunity costs than those we're trading with. Question C, must a trade which is good for one person be bad for the other? No. Trade occurs when there are comparative advantages that allow both parties to benefit. So it is not true that a trade which is good for one must be bad for the other. Question D, must a trade which is good for one person be good for the other? Well, the way that this is worded tells us no. It is possible for a party to suggest trade that would only be beneficial to them but not the other party. However, let's keep in mind that a trade agreement is likely only to be actually made if both parties are benefited. Question E, must trade which is good for a country be good for all its people? And this one is also no. That's because as countries import from another country, they're importing that at a lower cost than they could have produced, and that comes back to these opportunity costs and comparative advantages. So because they're importing at that lower cost, the domestic producers in that country are going to be hurt because they're going to have to sell their products for a lower price or be put out of business because they can't produce at that lower cost. So a trade which is good for a country isn't necessarily good for all of its people. It's going to be good for some, and inherently it's going to be bad for others.